Stress, it's everywhere. From overflowing inboxes to sleepless nights, we can all be feeling it. But are we managing it in the right way? Maybe you try to power through, maybe you try to unwind with a glass of wine, or maybe you just keep telling yourself that next week it will be slower and easier. But what does neuroscience actually say about stress relief? Is mindfulness really better than exercise? Can music or deep breathing actually change your brain? And more importantly, can we prevent stress before it takes over? So today we're going to be diving into the science of stress with what's happening in your brain and the real cost of not unwinding, and how to build daily habits that actually work with our usual real world examples. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed and thought, I just need a break, then this episode is for you. Let's get started.
So Amy, come on, tell us, what questions do people normally ask you when it comes to stress? Because it's something that we can all relate to, isn't it? And, why is it so important for us to pay attention to this?
Well, when we've been preparing for these, Jess, we've tried to break it down and focus on different things at different times. So often I'm asked, what does the neuroscience say the best way to de-stress is? Is it possible to relax without resorting to unhealthy behaviours? Can we prevent stress, or do we just have to manage it? And how can I incorporate stress relief approaches into more of a daily routine with my team? And the reason that I think people are naturally feeling like this is something that we want to address is because there's lots of evidence that says it's a big deal. So a survey by the UK's Mental Health Foundation found 74% of adults felt so stressed that at some point they felt overwhelmed or unable to cope. That's 74%. That's, 3/4. That's a lot of people. According to Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report, 44% of workers experience significant daily stress, and that's the highest rate since the survey began. 30% of adults globally have experienced clinical level anxiety or depression linked to prolonged stress. And the stress-related health costs in the US are estimated to be 190 billion annually. So this is why we're driven to try and help organizations and humans do things differently. But my guess, and I don't know for sure, Jess, but my guess is that you are seeing a lot of people in your clinics who are coming to you either explicitly aware that stress is the cause of their problems and wanting help, or coming because of some physical ailment, but you might be able to deduce that stress could be influencing, at least, if not causing that. So what are you seeing and what are you recommending?
Well, I mean, you've kind of summed it up nicely already, Amy. Those stats speak for themselves, don't they? Stress affects so many people. And actually, I'm actually quite surprised by the stats of 74%, because I would have put it higher, to be honest. People present with stress in my clinic on a daily basis, number of patients a day, but not only that, outside of my clinic room, in the staff room, staff members and colleagues, we all experience stress. And I think when it comes to kind of my professional role, yes, stress is such a key component to so many aspects of our health. It could be that there's this acute fight or flight response that's kicking in because somebody's directly affected by a specific stressor. There's chronic conditions, so chronic pain, for example. Stress can have such a significant impact on that, and dealing with things like arthritis. And not only when you have a specific diagnosis, but when there's uncertainty around a diagnosis, it doesn't automatically come to light what somebody's diagnosis is. There's a differential list, and there's investigations, and then potential referrals. So all of that uncertainty leads to kind of hidden stress. And then of course you've got the mood disorders, depression, etc., that stress is a huge factor in those conditions. So it's massive.
Can we wind back then? Because I was just on a call with a client who was narrating a range of different workplace intensity challenges, things that added to people's load at work and made it more difficult and triggered their self-reported stress levels going up and up and up. And a lot of, certainly the organisations we work with, take this really seriously, want things to be different for people. They're good people out there and they really want things to be different. And the theme that I was noticing through all these different examples this very experienced professional was given was uncertainty. So you've used that word uncertainty, and you're mentioning about arthritic conditions and chronic pain, and you and I both know my journey with being diagnosed with an arthritic based condition, and the lowest point I experienced was the loss of hope. So the uncertainty, yes, and I know the process, and I know the average time it can take for different conditions to be diagnosed, and even when you know that, it doesn't always help with the experience. So certainly the most stressed I was when I didn't think anymore that it was possible to move forward with a particular treatment trajectory that I thought would help. And since I've gone on, it has helped, so that's wonderful. But when you're then dealing with either with patients or, I guess, personally, do you think we recognise that this uncertainty can be so challenging? Like, do your patients recognise that it's the uncertainty that's causing major problems?
No, not always. Not always. I mean, I think when we've used the example of pain and you've been there. When you're in pain, it just is so overwhelming, and if it's chronic pain as well and it's affecting your everyday, it's difficult to really see the wood from the trees, isn't it? Rational thinking goes out the window, and the uncertainty around a situation, whether it's a diagnosis or whether it's, a workplace-based situation, may not be obvious to you until you then talk about it and have those kind of open and transparent discussions with people. I think my role as a GP is obviously to be investigating these various conditions, but validating somebody and saying, look, it's okay for you to feel this way. Uncertainty is all part of this unfortunate process, but we will get to a point where either we'll say, yes, you have a particular diagnosis and these are the treatment options, or actually excluding things and saying, look, you don't have this condition, you don't have this condition, and we can draw a line under that. And then having closure on a few of those things is beneficial for people. I mean, I think it all comes down to there's one aspect which I try to highlight to my trainees a lot, and I do use this with patients as well, but it's about kind of reframing the situation, isn't it? I think if we can look at things in a more kind of positive light, which isn't always easy when you're feeling down in the dumps about something, and it's a really difficult shift to try and adopt, but we can benefit from that and we will learn from that. And my trainees definitely need to learn from experiences that are not going in the way that they'd like them to. But I guess what I don't want for my trainees is for it to be a wasted opportunity. If they've had an interaction which didn't go their way, or a patient was upset for some reason, rather than seeing it as a negative on how they've performed, I like them to see that as an opportunity for their learning. With patients, I think it is challenging because there's so many factors which are impacting them on a social level as well as a physical level, that I don't obviously want to be going in all guns blazing and saying, look, this is really uncertain and you just need to accept that it's uncertain. I think it's a gentle approach and actually just saying, look, I'm here with you on this journey and we'll take things one step at a time. And yes, I try my best to then vocalize my thought process so that they know that A, I'm listening and I'm present, and B, they can then have clarity on where they stand in that journey. But it's difficult. It's really difficult when you're in the thick of it.
It is difficult, but I love what you've said there, is that you try and make transparent your thought process. And I think a lot of times in organizations, we keep a lot hidden from people, and that often isn't helpful for stress levels. It might be that bad news is coming, but if we know the journey, as you've said, and the trajectory points, the if-then plans, that can really reduce stress because we know, and that then means that our brain doesn't have to infer or create realities, which sometimes are far, far worse. I had a personal experience last week where I was unsure about what might happen, and I voiced, like, my extreme concern was really bad. And when I voiced it, the person was so surprised that I would even think that was a possibility. That reassured me no end. And now, when those situations happen again, which they will do, I don't have to worry about that scenario because I heard the shock and surprise in their voice that I was thinking about that. So that's reassured me. So sometimes
Oh,
that,
yeah.
yeah, that clarity is really important. Okay.
And I'm the same. I'm guilty of catastrophizing, but I think
Yeah.
sometimes when I think about or say out loud like the worst possible case scenario, it's always quite nice when that doesn't happen. So
Yeah.
so of course I don't want people, my patients or my trainees to catastrophize, but I think when you think about the worst case scenarios, and then you don't actually ever get to that point, it's reassuring. So yeah, just like you say, worth having these open conversations about things, isn't it?
So that leads me on then. How can we reduce our propensity for this catastrophizing, which many of us can be predisposed to? And certainly, I know an activity your mum does has got a really great evidence base behind it. And she doesn't do it because of the evidence base, but I think it certainly has served her very well over the years. So, what does
Mm.
she do?
Oh gosh, my mum is so dedicated. So she meditates. She wakes up at 4 a.m. to meditate, Amy, as you know, and I cannot even begin to imagine wanting to wake up at that time, volunteering. Yes, I do get woken up at that time by my son, but to voluntarily wake up at 4 a.m. is bonkers to me. But she does it. She does it every morning without fail. And yes, at times she might fall asleep during her meditation process, but actually the act of getting up, having that routine and that structure to her day, it starts her off on a good footing. And then she sits and she meditates. And what I what I've noticed is like that's an extreme for me anyway. That's extreme. Like I can't wake up at that time to do that. And she does it for a couple of hours. Again, I don't I value my sleep, and that's another thing we'll come on to later in this podcast. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that. But you know what I have tried to do is take a snippet of that in and incorporate that into my day to day. So I don't think I'd ever be able to manage that length of time, but 10 minutes in my day, for me, again, I try to encourage people to do this where it fits in with their routine and their pattern. But for me, the best time is last thing at night, when my mind is racing, my thoughts are racing, and I will take 10 minutes just to attempt some form of meditation. It takes practice, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm definitely no expert on it, but it does. I have found it's helpful. Whether I can do 2 hours like my mum in the future, I don't think so, but 10 minutes is good for me for now.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I love the flexibility in meeting people where they're at. The evidence based for meditation, lots of different forms of meditation, is strong. Even the mindfulness based stress reduction approach has got really good evidence behind it, helped lots of people. It can feel uncomfortable, but and different types of different studies have shown different increases in connectivity between different regions of the brain. But at the very least, you're looking to see the prefrontal cortex engage and connect more deeply, more connections to regions like the amygdala, in some instances the insula. But when we increase the brain's ability to regulate our emotions, that can help us be aware of when we're ruminating, we're catastrophizing, and when it's not real. So we need to be able to interrupt that process. And when we're in a mindfulness based state, we're reducing the activity in the default mode network, which that's not a bad network. A lot of people, I would say, need to increase their ability to access that network. But when it's left almost to run away to its own devices, that's when we could then start conceptualizing things that might be negative, especially if things are challenging. And they have found that even really short sessions, like 5 or 10 minutes, have helped people reduce stress, not only the perception of stress, but also reduce cortisol levels. And I think that's really interesting. Both are beneficial, but really amazing if we can actually influence cortisol levels. So, yes, there's sometimes we can learn a lot from our parents, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
So you said,
cortisol,
go on.
we always talk about cortisol when it comes to things like exercise, but yes, you're right. The evidence behind meditation and that to me when I first learned of that, I was actually quite blown away by that because we know that exercise is important. It lowers the stress hormone cortisol, increases our endorphins, but I'd never thought about it before when it came to meditation. So yeah, even more reason to try and incorporate it into your routine.
The more and more I learn about the human body, I've sort of been diving into some nutrition stuff recently, the more modern nutrition stuff, not the stuff. Do you remember our year one nutrition teacher who wrote the book on the nutrition stuff that we had to study? But it's moved on a lot since then, like so much. And one of the things that was really coming across in some of the latest research is just how finely tuned a machine we are, and how everything is so interwoven and sensitive, really. So it's brilliant that we've got all these different ways that we can dial up and dial down our cortisol levels. And so there will be something that is the right fit for different people. My daughter, the idea of doing mindfulness, I've tried a variety of different things and she's really rather unkeen. That said, she can go and sit at the top of a climbing frame looking out over a park for an hour, and that is her version of mindfulness. And she is in the moment a lot of the time. You ask her what was she thinking about, oh, I'm not. So I don't think she's activating the default mode network at those times. I think she's being present, and she talks about the sensations of the wind, the weather on her skin, on her body. So yeah, different things for different people. But I want to make sure we talk about sleep, because you mentioned sleep as being really important. And again, the evidence, if we're not getting enough sleep, can really affect our cortisol levels, but our ability to handle stress. And again, sort of my personal experience, my daughter didn't sleep really for 3 years after she was born for more than 2 hours at a time. And the cognitive impact was absolutely massive. And the friction between me and my husband, like, we had a lovely relationship up until that point. Then suddenly we were both in survival mode and sort of fighting just to, yeah, it really felt like to survive with, yeah, behaviors changed a lot. So, and that obviously then fuels stress and challenge. So what's your experience of sleep, and do people come to you saying, fix my sleep?
Oh, all the time, Amy, all the time. And, I feel for them. Similarly to you, my son hasn't been the best sleeper. And yeah, you can see why people use it as a form of torture, can't you? Sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
But yeah, people come to me all the time. And I think we're a society now where we want quick fixes for things. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. And there are quick fixes, but it's not sustainable to always want the quick fix. So yes, there are sleeping tablets and medications that we can take to aid with our sleep. But really what we should be focusing on, and what I encourage patients to do, is practicing good sleep hygiene. And people who suffer with insomnia sometimes do roll their eyes at me because they think they're doing everything that they possibly can, and they just want a tablet to help them. And yes, obviously if it's necessary and clinically appropriate, I will prescribe a short course of these medications, but really we need to be building into our routine practices which are going to benefit us when it comes to sleep. So for me personally, I know that the end of the day, when I've had a busy day at work and I've been talking to patients all day, interacting with colleagues all day, then I come home and my son's rabbiting on at me because he's excited to see me after school, after I come home from work and he's been from school. But really, that evening time, I just end up scrolling on my phone before bed. So I've stopped doing that, and I've replaced that with my meditation, and I've noticed a considerable improvement in my sleep. But going back to the exercise, actually getting exercise is so important for sleep. I have such a full-on packed day that I thought it was impossible to incorporate any exercise into my day. And my one luxury in life, as you know, is my PT, weekly PT session. And my lovely PT, he holds me accountable, and he says to me, Jesse, there's no excuse. You can find exercise moments in your day. And so he expects me to send him videos of exercising in my day. So it forces me to leave the surgery, go for a walk, and I have to video myself and send it to him. I mean, he must have a phone full of some very boring videos of my feet, but then it does. It gets me out. It gets me some fresh air. I tried to do this with a trainee recently. Not that we get much time to leave the practice, but there was an opportunity on this particular day to do so. So I took inspiration from my own trainer who I had a decade ago, and we had a tutorial and we went to a park and we walked and we discussed cases and we debriefed and we brainstormed, and just being in that different environment, we were still working, but it just really changed our tutorial, and I'd love to do more of those. But I think sleep hygiene, screen times, exercise, minimizing caffeine and fizzy drinks, and all of the stuff that we know about and read about. This it's out there for a reason. We just need to implement those changes really. And there's also really useful apps now available as well for cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's from my personal experiences that I just make excuses for these things, and I just actually need to do the simple things.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because often in organizations people ask for, well, what's the new science? What's the latest? And I love new and latest as well, but often people aren't doing the basics, and as you say, they're basics for a reason, and until we've got those down, layering on other things, there's no point. And I like what you say about almost the honest conversation that we need to have with ourselves. We like to think that we're doing all the things that we need to do, but quite often we're not, and we tell ourselves reasons, narratives why we're not, and think that it must be something else. But until we've covered those things, it might not be wise to layer on something else. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so social support is another area that can be really useful for reducing stress. And I'm glad that there seems to be more awareness over the impact of loneliness or exclusion. I mean, we've had a lot of research around this for many years now, but it's certainly, organisationally, it's not always where people would like it to be. Psychological safety, people feeling connected and included in things. We know that when we have healthy, positive social interactions, it can activate the reward network in the brain. And if we're feeling excluded, years ago, Eisenberg showed that the pain networks within the brain can be activated, so it can feel. We used to say, sticks and stones won't do break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the words really do hurt, and feeling excluded can feel awful for children as well as adults, and it's such a major driver of children's behavior, young children, but also very much teenagers' behavior. And if we evaluate people's reactions and decisions, not taking those things into consideration, then we're missing a big part of what's actually driving them. There's social prescribing's been in the news again recently. Is that something that you're a fan of? Do you think that's a way that we can help people?
Absolutely, yeah. Social prescribing is such an important aspect now of my work. I personally obviously don't, I don't have that role, but we do have social prescribers in the practice, and I refer to them all the time because we know that, if we have vulnerable patients who are lonely, having that befriending service, or, having that social and human interaction is just so important to then helping with their engagement with the management plans that I'm trying to encourage them to follow through with, and just generally their overall health and well-being is exponentially improved when they are having those very important social interactions. And I mean, speaking from personal experience, I mean, we all remember COVID. Gosh, it was an awful time for everyone. And when we were going to work, I mean, obviously I don't have the opportunity to work remotely the whole time, so I was having to go to practice, and we had a 11 a.m. coffee meetup in our waiting room. So we were all socially distanced, sitting in our waiting room, which ordinarily would have been full with patients, but we used that time where patients weren't coming in. We had a hot shed, what we call the hot shed, to see patients in outside the building. But we would sit at 11 a.m. as colleagues, and we would use that opportunity to have a coffee together. Or a glass of water, because it's important to stay hydrated. And we would discuss cases, or we would just have a chat, and we would just connect with one another, because we weren't seeing anyone, and it was very isolating for people. So that was a tough time. I hope we don't have that again. And if we do, then we must remember all of these lessons that we've learned. And that social connection is so valuable.
So I just finished that chapter in the Make Your Brain Workbook that looked at some of the impact of how organisations value or don't value that social connectedness time. And it reminded me, years ago, I worked with a police force, and they were telling me stories, this is way before COVID, about how their social centre, which was frequented on many nights of the week, but almost always on a Friday night, people would come together and they would debrief the week. They would talk about what they've learnt. None of it was formal, all of it was informal and evoked by the individuals, but the peer-to-peer learning, the informal counselling, coaching, connecting that went on, the decompressing from the traumas of the week was so important. And when they took that away, took the physical space away so that there wasn't a central place for people to meet, the negative impact was huge on engagement, but also on everything else. And the physical environment, I think, is so influential on how we do things and then the impact it has on us. And so thinking about that when we're looking to reduce stress in teams, think about how are you using your spaces and how are you bringing people together, and how does it trigger them to bring themselves together? Because a lot of times we think we need to do stuff to people, but actually, you know, your example of taking a trainee out for a walk to do a meeting, you've changed your physical environment, and it so changes the internal environment. We know the power of nature. We won't even go there today, but yeah, another environmental piece that's just so influential.
And I think actually, as working styles have changed, and you've got hybrid working, and a combination of remote and face-to-face working, we've got to kind of change with the times, haven't we? And yes, being face to face and being in the same meeting room as someone is very beneficial to have these debriefs. But we, as organizations, I guess you need to just consider, if you are doing remote work and that hybrid kind of work, therefore building into the week times when people are in the building, using that as an opportunity to then have these social meetups. And it doesn't have to be very long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Um, yeah, just worth bearing in mind,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. And a lot of organisations, I'd say, really are moving forward on that and doing some great things. And there's always so much complexity and challenge around doing different
Mm,
things.
mm,
Maybe one final area of research that I think is really important to bear in mind is our cognitive load. And I
mm,
saw something the other day, a paper on how even this effect was actually more pronounced in women than it was in men, which is interesting. But clutter around the home, and you could extrapolate that to wonder what effect it has in the working environment as well. But this study focused on the home, has been
mm.
shown to raise women's cortisol levels, raise our stress, experience of stress, just by having stuff laying around in our physical environment. And experientially, I really resonated with that and thought, yeah, when I see stuff around my home, I think that's a job for me to do. And it may
Absolutely.
not
Yeah.
actually be a job for me to do, but it has an impact on us. So, I mean, I guess that's outside the scope of a GP of saying, well, what is the state of your house like? But in terms of
No, no, actually, it really isn't. It really isn't.
really,
I think that this is why home visits are so invaluable for in our line of work. It's a window into somebody's life, and actually seeing somebody come to the surgery, like, for example, an elderly patient who's always very well presented, very smart, comes across as having it all together. I could go and visit their home and see a completely different environment, which paints a completely different picture. So yeah, I do as a as a GP, maybe not tell the patient to tidy up and clear up, but enlist the help of other services to help declutter and make the environment a safe environment. That's a fire hazard in itself, but yeah, I'm all for that. First thing I do when I come in to work is make sure that my working environment is tidy. I wipe down all my surfaces and I tidy up where if somebody's borrowed my room, I make sure that there's no mess anywhere because yeah, a clear environment for me is definitely a really big factor in having clarity for my working day.
amazing. Okay, I feel like this is one of those topics that we could spend another day talking about because there are so many different things, but we will put as much as we possibly can into the notes, into the neuro nuggets, and into the synaptic spark sheets so that you can unpack and think about what techniques you might want to add to your repertoire for stress reduction and what things you could experiment with in a team setting to really reduce the stress, because so much of our stress is influenced by our perceptions and how the information's being filtered into our brain, so then we can adapt. But if you did enjoy today's podcast, then please share it with a friend or colleague who you think might also find it helpful. It's one of the best ways to help us grow and reach more people like you.
Make sure you're following us on your preferred viewing or listening platform so you're first to know when a new episode is released.